Al Thomas here. Welcome back to the channel, All Things Business. Hey, I was reading up on successful people, and that's what I study. What about you? Do you study successful people and read up on them? Elon Musk put out, he says there's 7 books that changed his life, and the number 1 book on his list was the story about Steve Jobs. He said it influenced him more than any books he's ever read. And we all know the story. He was on the board of directors for Apple, and Steve Jobs got fired. And then he went out and started a company called Pixar, which became a multi-billion-dollar business. And all of a sudden, because Apple was losing share, the board decided to give Steve Jobs Apple back. But he didn't realize that Apple only had 2 more months of money put away before they were going to be bankrupt. So he needed a few $1 million fast. And the only person he could think of was his rival, which is who? Bill Gates. So Steve Jobs got on the phone and called Bill Gates. And he told Bill Gates how adequate he was. He was out of touch. But at this point, he had to make a phone call to Bill Gates to ask for help. So Steve Jobs called all his department heads together and all his managers. He says, how many products do we have today? They said, we have 104 products, sir. And he says, how many of them are making us money? They said, only 4. So he thought about it. He says, get rid of the 100. Let's get rid of everybody but those 4 people in those projects. And what happened was he did so well that Bill Gates, when he called Bill Gates told Steve Jobs, he said, Steve, my company is in bankrupt. I only have 2 more months of money set aside, and I need to borrow some money from you. And Bill Gates said this, and I quote, he said, Steve, Apple is too important of a company to go broke. Isn't that amazing? He understood what he had. He says, I will give you all the money that you need. He says, but I'm going to give it to you not as a loan, but I'm going to buy your stock. That way I'm also invested into Apple. I'm gambling. Listen up. I'm gambling that you're going to make Apple a success. This was the turning point for Apple. Steve Jobs got down to work and got into building Apple back to where it used to be. And they were discovering, what could we do differently? And they says, let's come out with a camera, an idea with a camera on the phone, and could have recordings and music and all that on the phone. And so they searched around and they found a company in Japan called Nokia. And Nokia at the time owned 49% of the cell phone market, as well as BlackBerry had 49%. So they were the cell phone makers of the world at that time. And Nokia had developed an iPhone, actually, but it wasn't very happy with it because they spent lots of money and a small percentage of the market. So they decided to sell it. They sold the patent. That's right, to Steve Jobs. And Apple found out that Nokia had it, and they said, look, we want to recoup some of our investment because this thing will never work. So when they bought it, Apple went to work on it. Within 5 years, Apple dominated the market, and Nokia was broke. Matter of fact, they went from 49 cents to 1%. BlackBerry went from 49 cents to 1%. And 5 years later, Apple sold 1 billion iPhones. Wow. I'll say it again. 1 billion. It became the first $1 trillion company to make sales. And the key was this. Here's the key to making money, just like any business. Number 1, make a sale. Number 2, make a second sale to the same customer. And number 3, make sure they tell their friends about it. And that was the chemistry that made Apple what it is today. When Warren Buffett was asked to invest, he says, I don't invest in anything I don't understand. However, listen to this. However, when a survey was taken and he found out that 90% of the people would buy another iPhone as it got better and better, Warren Buffett bought billions. Let me say it again. He bought billions of dollars in the stock. Let me tell you what his return was. His return was 1,246,000% return. And Warren Buffett said this in his annual report. He said, this is the best investment I have ever made. What about you? Are you investing in yourselves? Thank you for watching. I hope this blessed you today.